My wife cheated while reconnecting with a childhood friend, so I exposed her secrets to everyone. My wife and I met when we were both in our senior year in college. We started talking based on an interest in the same TV shows and anime, and then we eventually fell in love. To be honest, it felt so right at the time, and I didn't have too many moments where I ever doubted our relationship. There were quite a few stupid fights early on, especially regarding guys she was hanging out with, but I was always reassured. Looking back, I was probably gaslight, or is it gaslit? Either way, that was probably not the only red flag I ignored. Anyway, we dated for 4 years, tied the knot, and had been married for 3 years on top of that. So we were heading into our 10th year since we met in college. We lived our childhoods very far apart. I grew up in the United States, but I found out that before she lived here, her family lived in Ecuador, at least until she was about 12. Once she got here, she grew up in Washington. She would occasionally tell me about her childhood in Ecuador, and for someone like me who has never left the country, these stories were pretty interesting. It was through these stories that I learned about a really close childhood friend of hers called Daniel. From the sound of things, he had one of those innocent juvenile crushes on her, though she claimed she couldn't remember whether she felt the same way about him back then. She leaned towards there being very little emotion of that sort. She and Daniel hadn't been in contact much, though he had sent her a friend request on Facebook 2 or 3 years ago. They did a bit of catching up following the friend request, but soon after, it was nothing more than occasionally reacting to each other's posts on the platform, as far as I know, at least. The mess really started when she got a message from Daniel saying that he'd be moving to the United States. He had graduated school, worked a bit in Ecuador, and now he was ready to jump into the US job market. Great for him. The problem was, my wife seemed to be the only person this guy really knew in the US, and he really wanted them to meet up so they could reconnect, and so he could also learn the basics of living in this country that was new to him. To be honest, I didn't really think there was much wrong with this. They last saw each other when they were kids. There was little interaction as adults, none of it in person, and both she and Daniel seemed to be happily married. His wife would be coming along with him, after all. So the time finally came around, and Daniel flew over to the United States. He was going to start working in California, but his flight plan was to come straight to Dulles and go by road to Cali. My wife offered to pay for his road trip so it would be less inconvenient for him. In fact, she didn't consult me before she agreed to pay for him. He chose to make the trip to see her, so I'd have preferred if he took the brunt financially, but at the time, I thought I might have been a jerk. Considering this was a guy from South America about to start a new life, maybe it was a huge help for all the financial weight not to be on him. I drove my wife to meet him at a public park and noticed that there was no one else with Daniel. I knew he traveled with his wife, so I expected to see her there. After the pleasantries, I asked about his wife, and he said she went straight to California. I felt a little twinge of unease at that, since I had kind of removed any worry from my mind based on the fact that his wife would be around. But it wasn't improbable that she wouldn't want to spend the entire day in Washington, so I let it go. And since they were likely going to spend the whole day reminiscing in Spanish, and I really didn't want to be a third wheel, I took off. They'd have the day to themselves. She'd show him the sights of Washington, and I'd come pick them up whenever they were ready to call their day to a close. Again, this was a childhood friend that she hadn't seen in years, so as much as I was a bit jealous that she was spending the whole day with another man, I wasn't too worried about any real risk. It didn't seem likely that anything could happen between them so suddenly, and without arrangement. It was several hours later when I got a message from my wife saying that it'd be fine if I picked her up at any time from then. She sent me the address, and it was the bar we frequented the most. Again, I felt a little jealous, but it's a great bar to drink at in Converse, so it made sense. As long as no one had too much to drink, things would be fine. About 15 minutes after she sent the message, I left the house and made my way to the bar she was at. I got there and saw her and Daniel sitting at the usual spot, laughing intensely. I walked up to them, and while my wife smiled on seeing me, the laughter kind of faded out. The two of them didn't seem to be very eager to leave, but I guess my presence was like a bad omen bringing their great night to a close. My wife said bye to Daniel, and hugged him. I shook his hand, and we all left the bar together. My wife ordered an Uber to take him home, and we drove back to our house. "So, how was your day with Daniel?" That was the first thing out of my mouth as I took off my coat after entering the house. She seemed very happy to recount everything that happened, and again, I felt jealous. But wouldn't you say it makes sense to be happy about reconnecting with someone you hadn't seen for a very long time? I chalked it up to my insecurity and listened to her as she went on and on about how they walked through the park and chatted, how she took him into a museum, how they got a quick bite to eat, and how they ended up at the bar. I had an odd feeling toward the end of her story though, because she had a lot of details to share about what they talked about and all the other places. But they didn't seem to talk about much beyond the sports game that was on at the bar, at least according to how she recounted the story. I didn't pry though, because I hate seeming overly suspicious and insecure. And I really had nothing solid to be wary of. The rest of the night went fine, and I got over the niggling feeling I had. The next morning, literally seconds before I walked out of the house for work, my wife quickly squeezed in that she might be going to see Daniel. Yeah, at that point, I had a lot more than a niggling feeling. We had a conversation that went something like this. "What? Isn't he supposed to be heading to California today? Do you want to see him before he heads to the bus station, or what? He'll push his departure back by a day. Just a day. He'll go tomorrow. But there's so much to talk about, and I don't know the next time I'll see him. When did you find out he was staying an extra day? I mean, we talked about it yesterday at the bar, but nothing was confirmed yet. He let me know he'd made up his mind this morning." I just kind of stood there, dumbfounded, with a sinking feeling in my gut. Something just seemed wrong. Daniel wasn't a bad-looking guy. I'd say I look better though, if I do say so myself. But I started to wonder whether she felt some kind of spark for him, something that wasn't there when they were kids. I must have stood there without saying anything for quite some time, because she said, "Babe," to catch my attention. And in response to that, all I said was, "Okay." I had to get to work, so I turned to leave. Right then, she must have felt something was off, because as I stepped through the doorway she said, "I have to show up at work, so I won't spend much time with him, baby." I didn't bother replying. Now let's fast forward to when I was at work. Honestly, I was having a pretty hard time concentrating, because I had a very unpleasant feeling about my wife and Daniel. To be honest, I struggle with insecurity sometimes, so I had to keep asking myself whether I was overthinking things. I tried to keep my mind under control, but I failed, and I decided to ask to leave work early. My boss loves me, so that wasn't hard, especially since it was such an unusual request for me. I was granted permission, and off I went. I started to feel very crazy at this point, especially because I did something I'm not super proud to recount. But it was worth it. I've always been good at thinking things through. So the first thing I did was park my car at a shopping mall. After that, I took an Uber to a Hertz place and rented a very basic vehicle. Then I drove it to the hotel my wife mentioned Daniel was staying at, and I found a place to park that gave me a good view of the hotel's entrance. In case you're confused, I obviously couldn't drive my car, because my wife might have recognized it. Again, I felt crazy and stupid during all of this, because I wasn't even sure she was at the hotel. If she was to be believed, they would have taken another day out on the town. My wife would know better than to stay in a hotel room with another man alone, even if it was just to talk, because putting yourself in such situations is a recipe for trust issues. I'm not joking when I say I sat in the car for 4 hours straight. I was hungry. I needed to pee. But I was scared that any time I took off could be when I'd miss what I was hoping, or really, not hoping, to see. But almost as soon as it started becoming unbearable, I caught a familiar figure emerging from the hotel. It was my wife, and Daniel. I remember trying to make excuses for her in that moment. They were coming out of the hotel. But I had no idea what had happened between them. Maybe she wasn't in his room. They could have been in the lounge, or at the restaurant, or the bar. But the fact she was there so late in the day made me uneasy, since she had told me she wasn't going to spend much time. I was tussling between doubting her and trusting her in that moment. Well, the tussle lasted until I saw a car pull up in front of the entrance. It was an Uber, I assumed. They both walked up to it, and he opened the door for her. And before she ducked into the car, I watched them share a deep kiss. I don't know whether time slowed down or my perception exaggerated it. But the kiss went on for about 10 seconds. I still can't remember how I was able to regain clarity of thought, even briefly. But I managed to take a video of the last 3 seconds of the kiss. Then she hopped in the car. He closed the door. And her car left. I sat right there in that stupid rental car, unable to process any more thoughts. My brain felt frozen. I think I sat there for an additional hour before I went to return the rental. I didn't go back home that night. I told her I had to work late, and that I'd stay the night at the office. She sounded disappointed, but she didn't seem worried, because this was something I do frequently. I planned to sleep in a hotel. But then something occurred to me. My wife knew I wasn't coming home. And if she wasn't expected at home, she likely wouldn't have cut her night with Daniel short. I was still going to sleep in a hotel, but this time, it would be the exact hotel Daniel was staying at. I just had a very strong suspicion that she would go back to the hotel to spend the night with him, and try to leave in the early hours of the day, before I could possibly get back. So just like that I went back, taking my own car this time, and I booked a room. Fortunately, they weren't fully booked. It was dark already, so she wouldn't easily spot my car, especially where I parked it. I went into the hotel lobby and sat in the most inconspicuous location I could find that had a view of the door. Though, to be fair, it was a pretty big lounge, so I wasn't exactly hidden. I'd gotten to the hotel just 35 minutes after I'd called her. So I hoped I had gotten there before her, if she was even going to come. Almost as soon as the thought crossed my mind. Who do I see walk in? Her. Wearing a certain red dress that I had never been too shy to let her know how much I liked. I'll admit that all I wanted to do was get evidence that she was there and confront her with it later. But I think I lost my mind in that moment. I stood up and rushed over to her before she could ascend the stairs. I tapped her on the shoulder to get her to turn around. The shock on her face was a sight I could never forget. There were a few seconds of absolute silence between us. I could see her jaw moving like she wanted to say something, but she really had nothing smart to say. "What are you doing here?" That was what I was able to say, through clenched teeth, and she could definitely see I was mad. "You're here to see Daniel, aren't you?" Through a ridiculous amount of stuttering, she managed to let me know that yes, she was there to meet with Daniel. But no, she wasn't going to wait long in his hotel room. They were going to go out so she could take him to some kind of party, or event, or something. I asked her why I didn't know anything about this supposed party. But she only said, "It must have slipped my mind. I wasn't planning to go before." I actually remember seeing her hands trembling, though she tried to keep them steady against her body. "But what are you doing here?" "I'll show you," I said. And I brought out my phone and played the very brief clip I had, of her and Daniel kissing in front of the hotel. Now, fellas, I've never hit a woman, and I never will. But when she said, "You were spying on me?" as her only response to the video, I won't lie, I felt the urge to. And because of that, I only told her, "Don't come home tonight." Then I turned and walked out. She tried to grab my arm and say some stupid words to appeal to me. But I was scared of what I could do if she said something really idiotic in her defense. So I left. I went back home. And in the 3 days since then, she hasn't come home. I know she's fine, because her sister, who lives across town, asked me what was wrong. Apparently, my wife was too ashamed to admit to anything. But I didn't tell her anything either. So now, what I really need is advice. I need to hit her where it hurts, because she can't play me like this and get away with it. I'll be reading your comments, everyone. Edit. You've all given me a lot to read over the last few days, and I'm very grateful to you all. It's been very tough for me trying to figure out what to do through such heavy emotions. But yeah, I've decided to proceed with a divorce as the first step, like almost all of you recommended. I want to take things a step further with my wife, but I'm not quite sure how yet. I also have some plans for Daniel, but I'll keep that under wraps for now. Hopefully, I'll have an update for you all in some weeks, and hopefully not longer than that. Marriage, the ultimate trust exercise. It's like a game of Monopoly, except instead of pass and go and collecting $200, you're dodging infidelity accusations and collecting emotional baggage. And as for Daniel? Well, he's just the icing on the cake, isn't he? A blast from the past who decided to turn your marriage into a garbage dump. Who knew innocent juvenile infatuations could resurface like a bad penny? Now, onto the revenge plot. While some might suggest taking the high road, where's the fun in that? Nothing says. Revenge served cold, like a divorce settlement that leaves her wondering if Daniel's charm was worth it. Sounds like it's about time her sister knew exactly who she's related to. Update. Hey everyone, I'm glad to say that the update you've all been waiting for is here. And I'm just as happy to be telling you all about it as you'll probably be to read it. The first step for me was the divorce. I've got a friend from college who's now a pretty successful divorce lawyer. And he was the first person I gave a call after getting my mind settled. Papers have been filed. She's been served. While we haven't come to a solid agreement on anything yet, we don't have children, and our income isn't too far apart. So it's unlikely I'll be paying much alimony, if any. I can live with that to be away from her. We don't own a house. We don't have any kids. So fortunately, we won't have to go to war over those things. I'll leave her with the apartment, since the rent is ridiculous. But she loved the view so much, and honestly, I couldn't care less. Oh, she called me the other day. Crying and crying, asking whether she could come to the house and talk things over with me. I told her she could say whatever she wanted to say over the phone. But she just kept weeping, talking about how she was all alone. How she just made a mistake. And a lot of other nonsense through her tears. I might have folded. But all I needed to do was quickly look back at what she had done. And it was like smelling salts to me. Brought me straight back to my right senses. Now, I knew Daniel's name, and I found him online pretty easily. His wife wasn't hard to find after that. And all I had to do was tell her everything I knew about the little detour her husband took on their trip to America. The video I had helped seal the deal. She was mad. But it was easy for me to be there for her, because I was in the same boat as her. Just on opposite ends. We've been talking a lot. And she's a very attractive woman. I'm not saying I'm planning to do anything. But it'd certainly be poetic justice for both of us. We'll see how that develops. Anyway, she's going to leave his butt, which is exactly what I wanted. I just hope she doesn't backtrack, considering she came to America dependent on him. As for my wife, I had to be a lot more heartless to get at her. First step. I created a group of her closest family members and friends. And let them all know, including the sister who she still refused to tell what had happened. I didn't share the video with them. But I was ready to pull the trigger on that in case anyone chose to doubt me out loud. But I did think I could make the workplace a bit more uncomfortable for her. This part was tough, because I didn't want to have to deal with the whole defamation thing, even though it was true. Fortunately, I knew someone who works in the same building as her, though on a different floor. So I chatted him up and let him know about how I had separated from my wife, yada yada yada. I asked him whether he knew anyone on my wife's floor, and he let me know that he did. All I asked of him was to plant a seed in that person's ear, and hopefully, the rest would spread like gossip does. I told him I'd owe him lunch if he did me right. You should have seen the smile on my face when my wife called me fuming, asking why I would tell her job about what happened. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. After all, I didn't know anyone at her office, and she knew that was true. But she kept saying, You must have told someone. Somehow. You must have! I could hear her fighting back tears as she shouted at me. But I only enjoyed it as she did. She also screamed about the fact that I told everyone close to her about what she had done. But all I told her was to be thankful I hadn't sent them the video as well. She promised she was going to make the divorce hell for me. But honestly, I'm ready for it. I probably should have waited till things were finalized before my revenge. But I guess I was just too eager to get back at her. Either way, I'm happy being free of her. There's no point sticking around with cheaters. I'd rather be single than be with someone who was unfaithful. And if these are the cards the universe has dealt me, I'll take them. There are better things ahead for me. So thank you all for listening. And I hope you were able to learn something from my story. It wasn't fun to go through. But I'm still young, and I'll try my best to never waste my time on a woman like her again. Nothing quite like the sweet scent of revenge in the morning, right? Divorce papers filed. Wife served. And a new chapter of freedom beckoning. Creating a group chat to spill the tea to her nearest and dearest? That's some next-level petty genius right there. And leveraging your inside man at her workplace to sow seeds of discomfort? Well done, OP. Planting a seed of doubt in the fertile soil of workplace gossip. Truly a stroke of diabolical brilliance. Why waste time on someone who can't stay faithful, when there's a whole world out there waiting for a revenge-savvy bachelor like yourself? Cheers to better things ahead, OP. Has there ever been a time you sought revenge? Share your stories in the comments below. Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time.